Hello, this is Sam Simon for the last week in March. March, I guess, 30th. By the way, this is no April Fool's. In fact, it's a little bit of a sad one, so a little bit of a warning, but it is a reflection on travel again. Last week I did travel, and I didn't anticipate that, in fact, Susan and I would need to travel for a funeral. The sad news is that Susan's sister-in-law, Roz Cowmans, passed away uh, last Saturday um, in Houston, Texas. And the funeral was scheduled for this past Monday morning in Houston. Now, if you did watch, I had all sorts of hints last week on traveling with dementia, and I learned this again because I talked about how important it would be to get one of these um, lanyards and to wear them and how to get them and how TSA would be sensitive to it. But traveling in an emergency and at this time was quite an experience. And we learned some things from it. And I thought I would do two things: reflect a little bit about Susan's sister in law who passed away, Rosalind Cowmans, also known as Roz, and to her grandchildren and great grandchildren as Bubby Roz. Um, we met her. I met her when Susan and well, I met her before we were married. So Susan and I were married in 1966. So it's probably 63 or 64. Um, she would have been in her early 20s and married to her brother, Melvin Cowmans. Melvin is 89. And they too live, by the way, in a senior living center. Um, so many intersections in this particular sad moment. Roz had been sick for a while. She had had a stroke about a little over a year, maybe 18 months ago. Then became ill with a heart infection, which was turned out not to be curable. And she passed away under a hospice care at home, which was in a senior living facility in their apartment this past Saturday morning. Roz was a bit of a character. Her husband, Mel, Susan's um, older brother, but when I say older, he was next in age. Melvin is about 9 years older than Susan. They share the same curly hair and bright gray hair. Um, and she or in fact, we spent as much time with Mel or Melvin over the week. We arrived on late Sunday and had to come back on Saturday. Of course, the remarkable challenges at the moment were traveling in this shutdown environment into the airport that is doing the worst of any airport in America, which is Bush International Airport in Houston. I'll come back to that. Leaving from the Reagan Airport in Washington on Sunday was actually quite normal. It only took a few minutes to get Clear was open. It only took a few minutes for us to get to Clear and get into the airport, and we got there early and several hours early. But we sat and waited and were able to leave. Actually, we had to wait. We left about 15 minutes late and got in a half an hour early into Houston. Yes, the lanyard helped. It got us early boarding, got into our seats comfortably. And interestingly, I had an aisle seat on one side of the plane. Susan was in the center on the opposite side of the plane. And well, we switched aisle seat. I switched aisle seats, so Susan and I traveled together uh, down to Houston. And um, when we got there, and it was about 7 at night in Houston, we walked out, didn't seem to see anything normal. We had gotten an Uber and had normal but expensive drive to our hotel. I'm a Hilton Diamonds member, so we were able to have a near hotel nearby where the family lived, and um, other people who flew in were staying at the same facility. And again, the lanyard was essential. Um, the Uber driver was aware and very careful with us. The issue developed over the time was that Houston International Airport closed all but two terminals. They had, I think, 5 or 6 terminals. They closed all the clear lines, and that in the day, Monday and Tuesday, the wait times varied between 5 and 7 hours. Now, we had a flight back scheduled at noon on the Wednesday of this past week, and 7 hours before that would have been, let's see, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 6, 5. To be there in plenty of time, would have to arrive at 5 or 4 a.m. Things got a little better, and but I'm gonna stop talking about that and just talk a little bit about more about Susan's wonderful family. She has now just Mel Kalmans. Mel was an engineer. He and partners created a engineering firm that help build the insides of um, grocery stores, and they were very successful. Melvin's son, Brad Kalmans, is now president of the company. Got bought up later and is very large. And Brad is a very senior. Melvin's son is a very senior executive. They've been very successful in that way, but they've always been a very, the Kalmans family has been a very close Jewish family. They belong to Beth Yeshurun, the conservative synagogue, and that's where Susan grew up. That's the place where Susan and I were married, the Greenfield Chapel. And so I'm very familiar in that way, and as a familiar place. And Melvin and Roz had moved into a senior living community almost 5 years ago, and it really served the purpose of creating a community and lots of new friends, and kept them each busy with different groups of friends. And Roz started playing mahjong and all sorts of activities, very integrated into the community. So these sad moments are also good moments. They're moments of love and reconnection and honoring a very righteous life and great woman. So we went for that. The challenge was getting home, what to do. And I say this again because an option would have been for me to stay home. And maybe we would have needed to have somebody to at least look in on me or make sure I'd be okay. And would we need to have somebody stay with me maybe? I know it doesn't sound like I would need that. And we never know. And Susan would be worried. And, my son's around, and maybe they could have done that. I don't know. But I wanted to be there. I wanted to, their family, it's been 60, well, let's see, 59 years. It was 63 years since I've met them and known Roz. They're family. I get rid of this in-law business. After a while, we're all one family. And I was glad to be there. Glad to be there for Mel and for all the younger generations, and got to see and meet them again. And the reflections about Roz's life. It was a beautiful ceremony. It was in Houston. They do the congregation is a very large, has their own cemetery. They built a small building with a room enough to hold the funeral services at the cemetery, and it was very, very beautiful. And the children gave beautiful, beautiful eulogies themselves. So back to getting home. And as the news about Houston International became darker, if you will, first I checked with Hobby Airport in Houston, smaller, was not having the same delay problems. In fact, it was almost normal. Trouble is, United didn't have any flights from there. We could have switched to Southwest, which flies in and out of Hobby. But when you buy overnight two round trip airfares, they were very expensive, and we couldn't get a refund, but we could get credit for it, even if we changed. But then we had to buy new ones. That would be in the range of $5,000-$6,000 before that was all over. So we said, all right, we're going to stick with it. We arranged, our flight was originally at noon to leave. We moved it to 2:30 in the afternoon. We called a car service, not Uber, to make sure everything would work just right and nothing would go wrong. And we were picked up Wednesday morning at 5:45 in the morning from the hotel, arrived at the airport at 6:30. As we pull up into the departure area, maybe you've seen the pictures of the Houston airport. Outside were, I don't know, 10 lines. They had been taped off and people were walking through the lines. But we learned that you'd go first into the airport and there would be lines and lines and lines. Then they would take you down the escalators to the bottom floor. There'd be lines and lines and lines. Then you'd come up and be in the street in lines. And thank God it was moderate. It would have been moderate weather. It wasn't raining or anything. And then you finally go back in and head towards the TSA file. I decided, because I do have my lanyard and my ticket said early boarding disability, that we would get a wheelchair. And as we walked into the airport, right down the hall, down the terminal, we saw a wheelchair area. And we walked down into the wheelchair area. There was no questions. I'm going to try to share a picture. So I'm going to pause, as you may not notice the pause. So I think you can see over my shoulder. That's what the wheelchair line looked like. I'm in a chair just like that at the back of that line. And one of the most amazing things that happened in that line. So we're waiting there. Susan's next to me. She did not want to sit down. She stood the whole hour or so next to me. But there was another guy in a wheelchair, and Susan says, "Look, he's got the lanyard as well." And I looked, we waved, we showed it. Turns out he was an individual with Parkinson's, and he was also a theater professional in New York. So I was very, very pleased. I'm going to stop sharing, and I hope that worked out. It only took us about, like I said, an hour, a little over an hour to get through the security. Interesting. So what they do with wheelchairs, they take you through the employee entrance. You still have to show your ID and tickets, and then they took us to our gate. Now, we got into the gate about 7:30 for what would have been a 2 in the afternoon flight. And then somebody pointed out there was a 9:40 a.m. flight. So we quickly got on. Well, I actually found a desk person at one of the gates. They put us on the wait list, and turns out that flight, a lot of people had canceled. There was plenty of room, and we got on the flight. And then on the flight, we made the deal, and we could sit next to each other going. And I'm trying to remember now. This was similar. We were across from each other, and we made a change, and we sat next to each other again, a little bit further back in the plane. So it really, really was. Travel worked out. But we're still, I had to cancel a performance, by the way. I was scheduled to perform Dementia Man at the McLean Racquet Club this past Sunday night. We were working on rescheduling. And then just a reflection on love and loss in family. It's interesting that the family is getting used to understanding who I am now. They almost all say, you don't have it, or I don't see it. And we try to explain to them, they're pretty good about it. That's a bit of it. But it was very nice that we got to spend time with Melvin and to hold his hands, if you will, and Susan spent time the day after the funeral helping get Roz's things together and help us think too about why it's important for us to downsize right now. So this may be TMI for a group. Is it inspiring? I don't know. Other than, yes, even with early stage Alzheimer's, I can manage to be with my wife as we go through this end of life ritual. Yes, it is true that as our daughter said to us as we were explaining what was happening, she said, "Mom and Dad, your generation is going away." And yes, that's true. Hopefully we have still enough time and energy to make meaning and have a meaningful journey ourselves, contributing to our community and getting to know and meet all our younger generations, spend time with our grandkids, our kids, and maybe a great grand or two. Who knows? All right. Hope to be back next week with happier news and maybe some new tips on living well with a cognitive disorder. And yes, I want to dedicate this podcast to the memory of Roz Kalman.